I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the lands on which we meet today. And I'd also like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Today, we welcome Anna Spargo Ryan, who lives in Melbourne, where she writes about brains and love and people and family and food and creativity. Her short work has been published by The Guardian, The Big Issue, Elle, Good Weekend, Meanjin, The Saturday Paper, The Lifted Brow, Overland, Kill Your Darlings, Daily Life, The Age, The ABC, and many other places, although I'm not sure that there are any.
There aren't any others.
They could be. Her non-fiction book is A Kind of Magic, which we're going to talk about today, and it's about anxiety, our minds, memory, time, love, and optimism. And she's also the author of 2 novels, The Paper House, Control, and the non-fiction editor for Island magazine. Claire Halliday started her professional writing career as a regular freelancer to the Sunday Age and a diverse range of other women's and men's lifestyle magazines more than 25 years ago. Since then, she's written 5 adult non-fiction titles of her own and dozens of fiction and non-fiction titles for a children's educational publisher, as well as ghostwriting for others. She's also a copywriter, creating content for leading brands and businesses. Currently, Claire is working on what she hopes will be her next book and an accompanying podcast, a fascinating true crime tale about a family whose father was accused of being involved in Australia's most iconic and enduring mystery, disappearance of the Beaumont children. So thank you very much and welcome to Claire and Anna.
Thank you. And I just wanted to start by saying thank you to the library for making this possible. Thanks, of course, to everyone joining us too, because the more people that join events like this, the more the library will do in the future. You're here tonight to hear from our featured author guest, Anna Spargo Ryan. Welcome, Anna.
Thank you for having me.
No worries. So as Vicky mentioned, you've written 2 novels, but we're here primarily to talk about your latest book, A Kind of Magic, which is non-fiction, memoir combined with research. I want to dig into that mainly, but I will definitely have some questions about your fiction as well.
Sure.
But in terms of A Kind of Magic, I've seen a few things that you've done lately. I've listened to an interview you did on the ABC and you're on the drum. And I've heard you speak about your curiosity and your exploration of what you called the shape of memory and how that's impacted by mental health issues. And I was just wondering if you could tell us more about that, because I just love that phrasing and the experience that you've had in this book, revisiting so many of your childhood memories.
Okay, yes. So the memory stuff, I started doing research into that as part of my PhD, which was about how we can represent mental illness through writing. So I wanted to have a better sense of the different things that can have an influence on it so that I could write it, I guess, more truthfully. And what I found was a lot of research, a lot of scientific basis for the fact that someone who lives with complex mental illness, especially trauma-related illness, is more likely to have a bad memory. That was the main takeaway that I had from the research that I did, was people who've experienced trauma have worse memories. And when I looked into that further, there were all sorts of things that resonated with me and my own memory, which were things like someone who has a trauma-related illness is more likely to remember negative things. They're more likely to have negative or memories of negative events. They're more likely to mark the milestones of their life in a more abstract and negative way. So less likely to go, okay, the things in my life that make it my life, where I got married, I had children, I graduated from university, these kinds of things, and much more like this awful thing happened, or even this wonderful thing happened, but they're more likely to be driven by the underlying emotion of whatever that event was. And then we're also more likely to do things like generalize several different memories into one gigantic memory. So the outcome of that is someone who has experienced trauma is more likely to remember the bad stuff, then push all of the bad stuff into one gigantic, horrible memory, and then fixate on that as a milestone of their life. And that was actually a really helpful thing for me to kind of learn about, because it gave me a new way of understanding why stuff had stuck in my brain. So when I looked back on what had happened in my life, which does have trauma in it and I have experienced trauma-related illness, I could understand that there were things in between those memories, or that were part of those generalized gigantic balls of memories, that may have had a different emotion, you know, kind of attached to them that I had missed. And I learned about then the way that memory works. So stop me if this is too much boring memory theory.
No, this is the details I like. So keep it coming. Keep it coming.
So we have 4 different kinds of memory. We have, and actually I'm going to get them out because I don't want to get them wrong, but we have things called implicit and explicit memory, which are the memories that just exist in our brain that we don't call up, and then the memories that do exist and can be recalled. So like the tiny movies that sort of play in our mind, so we can go, I'm going to remember something. That's usually an explicit memory, and an implicit memory is one that we don't know is there, but that we use all the time. So the 4 we have are procedural memory, which is like motor skills and things that we don't think about at all. So breathing is a procedural memory. Our bodies know to do these things. We don't have to remember how to breathe in order to do it. Emotional memory is the one I was most interested in. So we attach emotion to memory, to things that happen to us, and store them in our memory without knowing that they're there or knowing why an emotional reaction happens. So we can have an experience in our life, something someone might call a trigger, that triggers an emotional reaction to something, but not be able to associate that emotional reaction with a memory that we can consciously recall. And that was where I was most interested in learning more about what my life was about. So and then we also have semantic memory, which is stuff that we have learned. So the example in the book is that we might learn what a species of lizard is. What we don't have to remember is when and how we learned that that was that species of lizard. So it's like we know that, but we don't need to recall the memory of how we learned it. And then episodic memory, which is the tiny movies. So actually playing out a movie of a time that we saw a lizard. Those are the 4 different kinds of memory. The way that we use memory is to build build an autobiographical narrative, build a sense of identity. So we take the memories that we have, whether they are implicit or explicit, whether we actually remember them or whether they just exist in our brains and we can't necessarily access them, they all become the foundation of who we are as a person. And so if you're somebody who's experienced trauma, it's the upshot of it, I guess, you might build your whole self narrative around terrible things that you remember happening to you. And that obviously affects your self-worth, and it makes you feel valueless, and it means that you know, I guess, understand yourself more in the context of some of these terrible things from your life than other parts of what a person who hasn't experienced trauma would build their identity out of. And trauma therapy, a lot of trauma therapy goes back to these kind of root causes of where that over negative, over generalized sense of self comes from, and is like, hey, is it possible that, you know, the way that you have internalized that could be a bit different from what you've sort of believed for the past 40 years? Is there another way of understanding it? Is there stuff that's in there as well that maybe doesn't come to the fore very often? And so what I found in writing was, because I was writing a book and it needed to have a continuous narrative, suddenly I had a reason to look for the things that were in between. So here's a terrible thing that happened to me that I don't like, that was hard to go through. It's here because it has informed who I am as a person. What happened between that thing and the next thing that I remember? How do I string together a whole sense of self and find the in-between moments that it must exist, so that I can create a book, a narrative for a book out of them? And that was, for me, as a writer, but also as a person, a revelatory experience where I wrote down, okay, here's where I think my life begins. Here are the things that I think are important about my life and what I know about myself. Oh, but this other thing is also here. Oh, I forgot that happened, or I didn't realize that those two things were linked until I actually sat down and was forced to link them together, because I'm a writer trying to put together a narrative. And it actually had a very profound impact on how I understood myself. Like, I'm not just those negative things, or it's not my fault that those are the only things that I can sort of, or that those are the main things, the primary things that I remember. That's not my fault. That's actually how science works. That's what my brain is doing from a physiological perspective as well as a psychological perspective. And so now I have an opportunity in writing a book to, I guess, rewrite my self-narrative. How else can I understand myself? And that was an incredibly powerful experience.
A powerful experience, but also one that I imagine, you know, might have been viewed with some trepidation. You're about to go into challenging territory that, you know, in some circumstances is delving into things that you don't want to remember. So why was now the right time for this book? I mean, you mentioned that you were doing the PhD in the studies about the brain, and that's what kind of sparked this chance to explore yourself in that way. But why was now the right time?
I had started to work with a new therapist who was she exploited my love of being the smartest and the most right. So she gave me a whole lot of research that she framed as, I don't usually do this, which may or may not have been a lie, but it was, I'm going to give you some insight because I think you can take it. Like, I think you can handle it. You're smart. You'll be able to understand what I'm doing. And so she helped me to find the meaning in some of the therapy that we were doing in a way that felt like I was discovering it. She was directing me, but it felt as though I was learning instead of being told what we were doing or why we were doing it, but actually to uncover the science, the theory, the reasons that we were doing it in the way that we were. And it was different from all the therapy I had done before. And that made me feel empowered. That was I felt like I could be trusted with difficult things. And that became part of the reason as well. I also, from a mental health perspective, I experience a lot of dissociation. And sometimes that has protected me from the difficult things that I'm writing about, or the potential impact of the things that I'm writing about. So someone will say to me, you're so brave for writing this, like, it's so much of you, you've exposed so much of yourself. And I'm like, oh, did I? Oh no, I didn't think of it like that. I thought I was just writing a story. I think there's a little bit of that. It feels that sometimes like it's quite distant from me, and that makes it easier to write. Other times it feels like it's coming from somewhere very, very deep inside me, but sometimes it feels like writing about somebody else, and that's a function of the illness. But having a therapist who could support me safely through it was very important. Once I got into it, it became almost self-fulfilling in that sense, that what I was writing about became healing, and then it was safer to write about it. So there's a bit in the book that sort of speaks to the fact that my publisher was nervous about the effect that it might have on me, that she kind of, you know, very delicately sort of said, is this going to make you worse? And I thought about whether she was right. I knew that was a reasonable question to ask, but was diving into this memory all of these memories going to make me feel horrible? Was it going to be re-traumatizing? Was I going to really do myself some damage? And I didn't reach a conclusion on that, other than it started to actually become quite therapeutic, not cathartic. People have asked about whether it was, you know, did writing it down expel it all from your body and then you were sort of freed of it? It was more like a process of learning why things were happening, and then I could rationalize them. And so they became less dangerous over time during the writing.
And was it mainly motivating for you because they were becoming less dangerous in terms of a better understanding of yourself? That was the important reason why you needed to go further into this and find out more and explore more? Or did the motivation also, you know, equally become that you wanted to share this information with others and help them and give them something that they could discover just as you had discovered it.
Yeah, the second part of that became quite a strong motivator, in that, not that I thought, I'm going to write something that's so powerful that it will help other people, but that understanding these scientific reasons that my brain was confused and was behaving the way that it was, really did help me. And when I talked to people who I know who have mental illness about it, it wasn't something that they were aware of. It wasn't, it's not really, I guess, the kind of thing that most therapies touch on. A lot of therapy is cognitive behavioral therapy, which is very surface level. It's like, how do you feel today? Let's try to stop you feeling like that. And then tomorrow, when you feel like it again, remember how we were able to stop you feeling like that and do that again. And it's kind of in the present, very present day, push the feelings aside. And what I had started doing was schema therapy and DBT, which are both about diving back into where you came from, the genesis of your identity and of your illness. And a lot of people who I know had only ever been offered that kind of surface level therapy that was not, in some cases, ever going to be that helpful. And so I thought, what if they had a way of having someone, I guess, take them through these things that I've learned? Wouldn't that potentially be quite helpful? I think that, so it was more about how impactful the things that I had learned were, rather than I think I can write a book that's going to help people. It's more like, I really want to share this with people. And I happen to already be writing a mental illness book, so I guess I should put it in there.
You mentioned before about blame, and I guess once you sort of recognized and realized and wanted to explore further the connection between trauma and your relationship with memories, that you realized that you'd blamed yourself for things that you now knew weren't actually your fault. And I'm just wondering how that realization changed the way you viewed your younger self. And I guess through that, how you view your current self today also.
Yes. I wrote a thing in The Guardian yesterday about ADHD, which I also have ADHD. And a lot of the ways that a child who is experiencing some kind of dissonance, I guess, is treated is kind of quite awful. A naughty child who's maliciously acting out from the time they're sort of 3 years old. Why are you so naughty? You're always, getting into things and being too noisy and not putting your toys away, and you're bad. All these value judgments that are put on children. And that's part of what I'm talking about. You internalize all of those words that are used to describe you, and they become the foundation of what you understand about who you are. So it goes from being like, why are you being so lazy, to just, I'm lazy. That's a fundamental core facet of my personality. I'm lazy. And what is missed then is, I guess, the humanness of the adult who says it in the first place. But we don't understand that as children, that someone who is fallible and probably stressed and trying to look after several other children, and that they are saying these things, but they're not saying it because it's a reflection of who you are as a person. And I think what happened was I was able to recognize that they had said, I understood why they had said it. Part of that was my own children, knowing that I've said these things to my children, even though I know that they're good people. And I've been like, why can't you just do this better? Or why can't you clean your room ever? Or that helped a bit, because I understood the adult perspective better. But also I understood what my little self had gone through in hearing those words, that sort of I felt very sad for her and compassionate towards her, and had rather than thinking as an adult she was bad, which is what an adult said to her, I thought, she's really trying her best. I know that she's trying her best, and I can tell her at one level that she's trying her best. And I kind of, with my therapist, went back and talked to my younger self, and in times where I remembered because I have trauma, remembered these very negative experiences that I had as a small child, being alone, being like kicked out of the classroom and sitting alone and not really understanding why, and actually imagining going and sitting next to that kid and saying, I know that you feel like the adults don't like you, but I know that you're trying your best. And it changed the foundational memories that I had, which then changed me as a person in the present day. The past, as I remembered it, was different from what it was like before. And so all of these things that had been part of creating my identity were different. And so therefore I was different. And it just let me reflect on where I came from in a more compassionate way.
And what were some of the things that you found most difficult to forgive yourself for in that process?
The early stuff as a little kid, I didn't find difficult to. I was very sad for that little kid, and I knew that there wasn't anything she could have done because she was 5, you know? And that was something that I reconciled a lot with my own children too, that when they were little, like I spent a lot of time when my children were small, now they're adults, being really like consciously thinking they're not doing this on purpose. And that was very important. So I didn't feel that way about when I was small, but as I got older, when I was a teenager, mostly the thing that I regretted was the relationship that I had with my mum, which was, I was so angry with her and she was also angry with me, and we were very similar. And so we had that, you know, we two people who were a parent and a child who were similar, just butt heads constantly. But also if we had had the language to talk to each other about it, we would have discovered that we were dealing with the same difficulties, challenges, I think. And so I felt a level of regret that I had not had the tools to try to communicate with her, and that had affected our relationship in a negative way for a long time, until once my children were born and they got a little bit older and I then had to be an adult and stuff, it was better. But for a long time, it was just me feeling like she didn't understand me and her feeling like I didn't understand her, when it was so wasted, because actually we understood each other perfectly if we had had the tools to do that. And it's funny because my dad, in reading this book, has said to me, I wish I had been able to speak in a language that would have helped you. And I don't have a memory of him not doing that. And I've said to him, you know, I didn't feel like you didn't, but he's right, he didn't either. But it was the fact that I think at one level I could tell that my mum and I were dealing with the same thing, and we just couldn't connect on it. And so it felt different. It felt like she was letting me down by not being able to guide me through it, whereas my dad was like this happy-go-lucky guy on the outer who just was never going to understand, even though he had a psychology degree. And I was still like, why doesn't mum get me? This is so, it was, yeah. So I really deeply struggled with revisiting some of those memories. It was very difficult to write about times that I should have been a better daughter, and times that I should have been better protected by her because I was a child.
So now, like even that conversation with your dad, how has that changed? I mean, that's something that's happened since the publication of the book. How has that changed your relationship with him and yourself in those memories?
I don't know if my relationship with my dad has ever or will ever change. He has been, I don't know what it is about him. He's basically Santa. If you met him, he looks like Santa. He's a very generous, warm-hearted, kind man, and that comes through in everything that he does. And so there was never any doubt in my mind that he loved me. And so my relationship with him is founded on the fact that I know that he loves me. And I didn't feel like that with my mum. I felt like I was letting her down. I think at one point when I was small, she said to me something like when you were born, I'm the eldest in my family, when you were born, like it ruined my life, because her career was interrupted, and she then had 2 more children. She was very stressed. She was always tired. My dad was always away for work and all these things. And so I felt guilty about being born, I think. And so, yeah, so my relationship with my dad has been constant and consistent the whole time. And it still is. And when he's saying to me, I feel bad because of these things that happened to you and that I wasn't, but I'm like, that isn't how I feel. It might be true that you might have let me down, but I don't feel like you did. I can't, that doesn't resonate with me. I can't relate to what you're saying. With my mum, I thought, I lay awake before this book came out. I would wake up every night at 2 a.m. and lie in bed until 5 or 6 o'clock crying because I was so worried about what it might do to my relationship with my mum, because now we have a really good relationship. And I thought, she's going to read this, or her friends, worse, her friends are going to read it and they're going to call her and say, do you know what Anna's written about you in this book? And I thought, what am I doing? I can't say these things about her in a book. Like, what is my problem? Then I went back into like child Anna going, why am I so awful? I'm so selfish. And this is a terrible thing to do to my mum. And actually, it was a chance to have a conversation with her that I should have had with her a long time ago. Like,
So
I didn't. Yeah.
That's a positive for this.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I guess, I mean, that's a pivotal relationship in your life. Obviously, there's other sort of, lesser characters, more minor characters, I guess, that in telling your story, you're also exposing elements of their story. Did you have those same sort of lay awake at night fears, or how did you sort of reconcile that?
No, I didn't. I think the thing was, when I was little, it was her, my dad, and my brother and sister. They were my whole life. I was a lonely kid. And so I didn't worry so much about other people, because there weren't really any. My nana features a lot in this book. And I think she would be very upset with how she's represented in this book, actually. It's hard to write that you adore someone and that their behavior is problematic. That's a really hard thing to convey. I love her so. She's 97. She can't read because she can't see or hear, so she can't read this book. And I thought about that a lot, that I was writing about her while she was still alive, and she has no right of reply. But I hope that what comes through is how much I adored her and how much I learned from her. So I did worry about that. The people, as I got older, I felt like, well, this is my story. I'm fairly confident that the people behaved in this way. And, you know, that Anne Lamott quote, like, if they wanted you to write nice things about them, they should have behaved better. I thought about that a lot. I was like, this is, and I was always trying to bring it back to not in a vengeful way. I was really conscious of not making this a vengeful book and, you know, writing down these people did me wrong, but to actually go, this is something that happened. It doesn't really matter that it happened, like, to you, the reader. I'm not putting a value judgment on it. I'm not encouraging you to put a value judgment on it. I just want you to try to come with me to understand the impact that it had on me in the long term, because maybe that will help you to understand the impact of the things that have happened in your life in the long term. That was why I included pretty much everybody in this book. Some of it was gratitude. Some, like Gaz, who features a lot in the second half of this book, my partner, part of that was just a love letter to him, just like a thank you letter to him for all the things that he did to help me stay alive. But a lot of it was, what does this all mean? One of the things as a nonfiction teacher that I talk about a lot is like this core, the spine of the story. What is the story about? And that you have to keep coming back to it. What am I trying to argue for? And what I was trying to argue was something about the genesis of a mental illness, where it all comes from, and that if you identify those things where it's sort of foundations, maybe you can change your understanding of it. So I was trying to do that I guess in practice as well in the book. This happened, don't worry about it, but this was the outcome.
Yeah. And I think that's an important thing in a book about mental health, because people who are dealing with their own mental health issues are hoping for that positive outcome and want that optimism, because your book is really infused with quite a lot of optimism, even though we're dealing with difficult times. I want to go back to talking about forgiveness, and you're saying you've forgiven yourself. I guess, like I said, for the people who maybe are going through their own mental health issues and want to see that ray of sunshine, what does life look like now? How has the day-to-day changed for you now that you have granted yourself that forgiveness?
Yeah, I guess the first thing I would say is to just differentiate between forgiving yourself and forgiving other people. I don't think that we should always forgive people, because sometimes people do terrible things. But we can, hopefully, one of the things that I have tried to do is let myself, I think, to like myself enough to not carry that enormous load of resentment and anger about things that have happened, to just go that they don't care. I had this boyfriend who features very minimally in this book. He's got like one paragraph, I think, when I was a teenager, who was physically and mentally horribly abusive to me for a couple of years. And I was so angry about him for so long. Like, why did he treat me like that? I had all these residual feelings of, that I'm worthless, that I don't deserve to be loved, that everybody's going to hurt me, all of these sorts of things that stuck with me. A few months ago, I don't know, I was tweeting something, and he sent me a direct message on Twitter. I don't follow him, and he doesn't follow me either. So he had sought me out, and he sent me a message that was something like, "Hey, it's me, your high school boyfriend, lol." And I thought, he has no idea how much anger I carry around about him, and he doesn't care. And all I'm doing is loading myself up with this energy. Like, this energy could be used for something better. And that was quite a significant moment for me, actually. Like, it's not the memory is not the same for him as it is for me. I've talked to my parents about things that have hurt me in the past, and they don't remember them. They're like, "Oh, I don't know if that, no, it doesn't ring a bell." And so I think it was the liking myself enough to let go of some of that for my own benefit. It wasn't like, I'm going to forgive that person because I don't want them to feel bad. I'm going to absolve them of all responsibility, but I'm going to let myself live a fuller life by using that energy for something else. Which is, I have been in therapy for 24 years. So partly it's that. Partly it's like successful therapy. That's definitely in there too. It's not, that hasn't been easy work, but it has been achievable work in the end. And in my life, I now like myself enough to want good things for myself. So I took up running, which I'd been literally on the couch. If you've read the book, like literally on the couch for a decade. And I was scared to go outside. I'm still pretty scared to go outside, but because I liked myself, I wanted me to have positive, enriching experiences. And then when I started running, because I wanted to feel strong. I sort of wanted to feel like I was, that I was strong, that I was capable. And that felt like a literal way to be able to do that, I guess. Once I started running, I realized I could trust my body more. It's like, my body's it's healthy. It's a healthy body because I have been mentally well enough to want to make it a healthy body, because I feel like I deserve to be in a healthy body. Now my body's probably not just going to die every time I go to the park. So then I felt like I could go to the park. And then I felt like I want to go to the park. And then I felt like, let's all go to the park. And like, it was this sort of snowballing, just embracing the nice things that there are, that I don't anymore feel as though I don't deserve them, or that, only good kids get to do those things, or I should be afraid because there are so many dangers and I'm in trouble all the time and I'm bad, and all of those kinds of feelings. So it has actually fundamentally changed my life in almost every way. When I wrote this book and learned all these things, I got to the end and I had a type of book, a manuscript, and I kept looking at it and being like, this is such an angry book and I don't relate to that narrator anymore. And I went back to the beginning and I wrote the book again as, I was going to say my new self, but that's not what I mean. It just, with the new perspective that I had, and it was quite a different book. It was based on an essay that I wrote a number of years ago called The Suicide Gene, which was about how my grandfather suicided and was it inevitable that I would also feel horrible. And that was what I called the book for quite a long time. The book was called The Suicide Gene when I sold it to the publisher.
Right.
And that felt so far away from the book that I ended up writing.
Yeah, I mean, just that's obvious by the titles, because like I said before, it's infused with a real optimism, and the suicide gene and a kind of magic are poles apart.
Yeah, totally.
In that view.
Yeah, well,
and also the suicide gene was the essay that you wrote that won the Horn Prize, wasn't it?
Yes. The cover was it. So this is the cover. When my publisher asked me what I thought about the cover, like, what do you have any ideas? You don't really get a say, but do you have any ideas about what the cover should be? I was like, can it be bright? And it's, I don't know if you can tell, but it's got gold foiling on it.
It's pretty.
And these teardrops are all gold, and the title is like a spot varnish, so it shines, all of it shines. And when I got this book out of its box and I saw how beautiful it was, I just started crying, because the fact that as someone who's been mentally ill, debilitatingly so for her whole life pretty much, the fact that my mental illness book looks like this and is called A Kind of Magic was so overwhelmingly different from what I had experienced in my life. To get to this book's point, I guess, to have a book that is like this is what I couldn't have imagined that it could be like that, and now it is. And that is, and I don't expect that it will, it's not a redemption book. It's not like, and now everything's fine. It's just, I am okay and valuable as a human now. And but now I believe that I am. And I didn't before. And a lot of that was all of these letting go of other people's value judgments.
Now, I want to make sure that we have time to answer any questions.
Sorry, I'm talking so much.
No, that's all good. I'm not going to jump on it right now. This is just my little niggly reminder to the audience to say, if you haven't yet typed a question into the chat, please do now. I've just got a couple more questions for Anna, but we really want to have time for your questions if you have any. So get typing. But Anna, back to the book. We've mentioned the optimism. That last answer that you just gave then really showcases the difference between your approach to the writing of it and your own mindset. It's obviously based so much on your personal life and you're giving so much of yourself, but it is also research, a lot of research, because you are dealing with mental health and you do talk about the science of that. So can you tell us a little bit about how important that side of the book was in terms of the level of research and how you approached that side of the writing?
Yeah, I mean, I knew that was the kind of book that I wanted to write. I didn't just want it to be, here's my life story. I wanted to provide a framework for understanding. And I also wanted to have an opportunity to comment on, for example, the state of the mental health industry, and what's lacking and how I think it could be less lacking, and how misunderstood people who live with complex mental illness are and why. And that in writing the book that you were going to get an insight into who I am in my best friend said, this is Anna from like page 1 to the end. You're getting kind of unabridged, unadulterated Anna. I know Anna as well as anybody. This is her on the page. So I was going to give people that insight into me. I guess I wanted them to understand more about why. A lot of people say to me, you don't seem anxious. And I'm like, maybe you don't understand what an anxious person is like. Maybe you don't know what a person who has had personality disorder traits is like. Maybe that's a you problem. And So with the book, I wanted to show that I could do it, the research part. I wanted to go, look, people who have mental illness like mine, which is quite serious, are smart and informed, and we are required to be good advocates for ourselves because otherwise we die. That was very important. I wanted to hopefully help somebody else who hadn't had an opportunity to do that research, who maybe wasn't in a place where they had access to that. I mean, you know, I'm a highly literate middle-class person with time. And so, you know, it was important to me to imagine that it might be helpful that I gave someone some of that information where they might not be able to access it themselves, in a way that took out a lot of the academic gatekeeping language barriers. Yeah, and that also that I tied it into the real life. So one of the things is that each of these chapters uses clinical language or a dictionary definition of something, like, I'll just open to any of them. The panic chapter is called Extreme Avoidance of Situations That Might Cause Panic, which is how they describe in the diagnostic criteria a panic disorder. And what I wanted to say was that is so insufficient in describing what the lived experience is. Those words can never convey to you what it's like to live with this kind of illness. That's what I'm going to do. So I guess contrasting the research with the lived experience was also a way to say, that's all well and good, but this is what it's like to live in that brain. And I didn't think I could do that without having both of those things in there.
There's a lot of moving parts in creating a book like this, because you're approaching it as a writer, wanting it to be beautifully written, wanting it to, I guess, you know, succeed on that level. I don't mean like, you know, dollar success. I just mean,
no, I know what you mean,
your version of success, of what that should be, and how great you want it to be. I'm just wondering how differently you approach the writing process of it, because I mean, obviously you do a lot of short form nonfiction, but your two previous books have been novels. And so, you know, you've already given us the story that you had basically the book entirely written and rewrote it again. So how long did this actually take to write? And did you approach it in the way that many fiction writers approach it, like, I've got to write 1,000 words a day, or I've got to do this step by step?
So the first part of my answer is that during the week, it's funny that you asked this, during the week last week, I actually, on Saturday, there was a beautiful review of this book in the Saturday paper by Geordie Williamson, who is such an esteemed critic that it's an honor even to be reviewed by him, let alone to be reviewed beautifully by him. And I read that review and I thought, oh, wow, Geordie Williamson has said these things about me and my writing particularly. He touched on the craft of the book quite a bit. And then I got some messages from people who had read it, who weren't critics, who weren't writers, but who live with mental illness. And they said things like, thank you, now I have some new things I can go and ask my psychologist about. And thank you, I feel like I'm no longer the only person who's ever had this experience. And thank you, now I have new language I can use to try to explain this to my partner or my dad or my son or whatever. And also, this book is like a friend. Lots of people said to me, I feel comforted by this. I feel less isolated because I have this book. It feels like my friend. And when I wrote my other books, which are literary fiction, the writing and the craft of it was the ultimate of ultimate importance to me. I'm a writer first, you know, like a lot of memoirs are out at the moment. Memoir is quite popular at the moment. Most of those memoirs are written by people who have had interesting experiences, who have then written a book about it. And I felt like my book was a writer first, writing about something that had happened to her. And I realized in getting these messages and reading Geordie's review alongside it, that what I really cared about was the impact that it might have on somebody. And I didn't care whether those people thought it was good writing or not. And that was really significant for me, because I'm like a capital W wanker writer, you know? And so, yeah, that surprised me, because there is a lot of craft in here. It uses a lot of different creative writing tools. It is narrative nonfiction. So it uses dialogue, it uses characterization, it uses setting, it uses poetics, lots of poetics. I mean, I think the whole language of mental illness is really poetics. How do we convey something that doesn't exist in anybody else's reality? We use metaphor, we use simile, we use images that somebody will understand, and then they can understand our experience better. So it's like chock-a-block full of that stuff. And that was very important to me while I was writing it. How do I write a beautiful book? How do I write an impactful book? How do I change somebody's mind because of the way that it's written? But that has, in the publishing of it, become less important. I mean, I say this might change if I get a horrible review next week. Like, oh, they hate the writing. Oh no, it turns out I'm not okay with that after all. But at the moment, it feels like, it feels like what is more important is the way it can connect to people. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question. It took about 2.5 years to write. It came about because I tweeted, will somebody please let me write a mental illness book? I think it would be really good. And I got 11 offers from publishers off the back of that tweet. And we had an auction. And then I was like, oh, I forgot the bit where I was going to have to write the book. And now I don't know what it is or how to do it or what's going to happen. So yeah, it took a little bit of writing, but
here we are.
Yeah.
Now, Vicky, are there any questions from the audience before?
Yeah,
Great.
rolling
Thank
in.
you.
From Adam. Hi, Anna. You tweeted today that you no longer drink alcohol. When did you make this decision? Has it made a difference to your mental health?
So I haven't, well, when I say don't drink alcohol, I don't have a substance use illness. So I do occasionally, like, if someone was like, have a sip of this wine and see what it tastes like, I'd be like, okay, that's not a problem for me. But it was because of my mental health that I stopped drinking it. I don't like feeling out of control. And so I don't drink coffee. I don't drink caffeinated soft drink. I don't smoke anymore. I quit smoking. I haven't done illicit drugs since I was a teenager, all these kinds of things. I have no vices except chocolate. It has made a difference to my mental health because I can rely on, to the extent that I can with my illness, rely on what my brain is telling me, which is really important. Because I can't, because my brain dissociates and remembers things that didn't happen and puts emphasis on overly negative things, etc. I can't trust what my brain tells me. So I need to make it as trustworthy as possible, I guess is the answer to that question. Yep.
And from Olivia, has changes in the world due to COVID changed how you saw yourself or your illness or your community?
Yes, to all of those. There's a book out at the moment called Admissions, which is from Upswell. That's what they call it, isn't it? Upswell Publishing. That's a collection of essays from people with mental illness. And in that, I wrote about the experience of having anxiety that kept me inside, especially for such a long time. And then what it was like when everybody was kept inside, and how suddenly all these barriers that I had experienced were gone. Like, people had said to me for years, no, you can't dial in, that's too hard. You can't work remotely, that's too hard. And then suddenly when everybody needed to do it, it wasn't too hard anymore. It had I guess, a dual effect of being really angry about it. Like, oh, this is possible the whole time, while also having access to things that I hadn't for a really, really long time. I could go to concerts and book launches and like short courses and birthdays and things that I hadn't been able to. And that was, I keep having this conversation with people, and I have to give the caveat that obviously COVID was really bad, but for someone like me, it was equalizing. And as people, I guess, start to do the things that they were doing before, whether or not we could debate whether the pandemic is over, but as they start to go back to what they were doing before, we're losing those things again. And I feel that really acutely. Like, okay, I can't go to that. I can't do that. They're not having a live stream of that. They're not, and that's really hard.
Thank you. Vicky, other questions?
Yeah, there's another one from Olivia, and she apologises for not having read your book yet.
No, that's okay.
A disconnect that she has with her child is that she has times when her brain isn't reliable and she feels she's being awfully not believing her daughter, and she has a mental illness. And when in a calm, she can recognise that unreliability. And Olivia has wondered if you have a brain that lies to you, and if you do, how you learn to recognise that, or how people can stop making it worse.
Yes, I do. I think as a parent, what's more important than recognizing when your brain is lying, because that's really hard to do. That's something that you learn how to do with a therapist over probably quite a long period of time, if you learn it ever. What has been important for me as a parent is to have an open communication, transparent communication with my children. So when I was small, my mum had and has anxiety, and she would panic, and I thought she was dying. And every time it happened, I thought she was dying. And so I grew up with this sense that my mum was always about to die. And if she had been able to, and we didn't, this was the 80s, we didn't have this kind of language then, but if she had been able to say to me, this is what's happening, my brain does this thing, even if it was like little kid language, my brain does this thing where it thinks that something bad is going to happen, but it's not, my brain is lying. That would have helped me tremendously. And so with my kids, they are anxious people, but it has been almost my number one priority to say to them, don't be afraid. We're not in danger. You're not in danger, especially. My brain does these things. It thinks there's danger where there isn't. It responds to things that aren't really dangerous by, adrenaline surges through my body. And so I can't control what I am really feeling that well. It's hard to manage. It makes me feel bad, but it will pass. You're safe. I'm actually safe. My brain just doesn't think that I am. And I hope in doing that, have at least taken out the mystery of it, which was the thing that was so damaging to me, that once I knew what was happening with my mum, then I was just sympathetic, then I was just like, I'm really sorry that you have to deal with that. But before that, I was like, why are you doing this to me? Why are you putting me in harm's way? Or why are you yelling at me for no reason? And if I had known. So I think that in my parenting life has been more important than being able to, I guess, objectively identify when my brain was not working properly, but to give my children tools to manage when it was, because it was that, yeah. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's been my approach.
Vicky?
Linda has said that she's sad to have to bail early, but thank you for your eloquence.
Oh, I'll tweet to
her. Mario has asked, what does it take to become a writer?
Oh, that's a big question. Perseverance. You have to keep writing. The unfortunate thing I say to everybody about writing is that no one else cares enough about your writing to finish it for you, unless you're like George R.R. Martin and people are waiting on it. No, you're not. No one's going to be sad if you don't. It's the hard truth of it. And so you have to keep doing it. You have to sit down and write every single word. There's no shortcuts. It's just hard work. So that, and then optimism, keep trying, even, through, because you get rejected. I got rejected last week. So you have to want to keep persevering. And people say things like read a lot. I hardly read at all. I don't have the attention span to read. So I don't know if that's helpful or not to read. Practice a lot though, do writing a lot, and then look at it critically. What could I have done better? How could I make this more like what I was hoping it would be? It's one of those things that I think plays into that, like, to be an expert at something, you have to do it for 10,000 hours or whatever that kind of stat is. And there's a lot of that. Some of it you only know how to do because you've done it lots and lots and lots and lots of times before. And then it becomes part of what you know how to do. From like a publishing perspective, being a writer as a career, ask people. The thing that I found when I wanted to become a writer kind of 12 years ago was I found it all very mysterious, and I didn't know how to get the information that I needed. And it was only because a couple of people were really, really helpful, because I asked them questions and they were kind of kind and helpful enough to let me in on the secret that I ever got published. And so now I try to do that for other people. Like, so ask me anything, send me a tweet, like, Anna, I don't know how to to write a query letter, and I will help you. That stuff I think shouldn't be secret, and it was very frustrating to me that it was. So find information, ask for information, join writing communities, whether they're on Twitter or Facebook or in person, or go to events like this, go to kind of workshopping groups or things that are, you know, that where people are talking about writing and living a writerly life, I think. And yeah, you'll kind of pick it all up as you go. Yeah.
Vicky, I've seen maybe 2 or 3 new questions pop in. Have we got time to get through them?
I think so. I'll speak.
Yeah,
I've got time.
Olivia has asked, do you need a particular type of therapist to write your story of mental illness or ADHD?
Just the right therapist, which sounds much easier than it is. I had a therapist who didn't help me for 10 years, and I didn't know she wasn't helping me, because that's the part that we don't share with people. So a GP doesn't say to you, here's your referral. If this is happening, find a new therapist. So you go and you think, well, I'm going to therapy, so this must be helping. And you have no framework or context for whether or not it's, like, how do you understand whether it's helping or not? And it wasn't until I went to a new therapist. I said the other day to someone, it felt like a last ditch effort. It felt like I'm going to give it one last go. I felt horrible. I was like as sick as I'd ever been. I'm going to try somebody else just to see if it makes any difference. And luckily for me, I clicked with that therapist and that helped. But that's a bit of trial and error. Finding the right therapist is hard and expensive, because it costs money every time you go to one person to see if you click with them. But I mean, look for the information that they provide, though. They like, on a website, a psychologist will tell you what their specialties are. I went to a therapist who specialized in anxiety and psychosis, because those were the 2 things I needed help with. So that was a bit of a shortcut, I guess. But yeah, that having the right therapist who has a therapeutic approach that actually help you, that's what you need.
Thank you.
And when you rewrote the book, did you completely ignore the first version, or did you keep referring to it with the new version?
There were some things in it that I felt like I had captured really well, which was mostly things that had happened in my life, anecdotes. The anecdotes I felt were pretty good, because they were things that they were just recounting the things that had happened to me. So I kept a lot of those, or I rewrote those with reference to the ones that I had already done. The rest, I never chuck anything out. Maybe that's a writer tip. Never put anything in actually delete anything. I just put it all in a folder called, either, depending on how it is, I've got one called like could be good later, and then another one called like this is horrible, put it in the bin, kind of thing. Sometimes stuff makes it back into a manuscript once it's been in one of those folders. So I never chuck anything out, but I didn't refer back to what I had done before, with probably 60% of it was just, no, that wasn't it. Try again. And I did a lot of work on the structure. I went to several sort of workshops, weeks-long workshops on structure, to try to find the way that I could tell this story best. And it took a long time and a lot of reorganizing before I had a day where it's like, oh, what if and then I could, and kind of, then I had a way forward with it. But I found that really tricky. And the book touches a lot on time and chronology. And that became part of how I was trying to approach the structure as well. Like, do I tell it in chronological order? Is that the best way to explain what has happened? And I found that it wasn't. So I was trying to also do something a bit tricky there, which was hard.
Maybe time.
There's one more question.
One more question. Yeah. How did your dad react when he read the part where you described the conversation you had with him, when he told you to keep behaving like you were as an adult, no one would like you because you don't seem to hold your right?
Yeah, I'll probably cry when I talk about this, actually. I'm going to just quickly see if I can quickly find it in here. I think I know where it is. So I had, I don't know if I can. I had a couple of things like that. There was a bit where I had a best friend who said to me, when I was feeling very insecure, she said to me, "Oh, people like you." And I was like, "Do they?" And she went, "Yeah, in the beginning, but then the novelty wears off." And I was like, that's stuck with me for my whole life. But there was a bit with my dad where he took me out to a party when I was about 14. Here it is. So I was invited to this girl Jane's party somewhere on the other side of town. Dad drove me there. I don't remember anything about that car ride except that we pulled up in front of Jane's house, and for reasons that have been lost to history, Dad turned to me and said, "If you keep acting like this as an adult, no one will like you." I'm sure he said this. There's a lot of cloudiness in my mind about all kinds of things, but of this I'm absolutely positive. I can't remember how I was acting, so unfortunately I can't apply the lesson to all the friends I make and lose as an adult, but I think about it a lot. Yeah, it's a good question. My dad is willing to listen, and that is the only reason that's in there. My relationship with my dad will not be permanently damaged by saying true things about what happened. And he wants to be the best dad. Even now, he's 74 and we're all adults. And even now, he wants to be a better and better dad. He's just a great dad. And when he said that to me, I think he was trying to help. Do you know what I mean? Like it was mean. God, it was so mean. And at the time I felt like, how could you say that to me? But in his sort of way, he thought that I needed to hear that. And so I'm not angry with him about it. Again, it was just an important thing I felt to know about what I had learned about myself as a teenager. Between that and this other friend who said the novelty wears off, which it does, like she was right. Those things came with me into my adulthood, and I wanted to be able to demonstrate to a reader why. But a lot of why that's there and how we have managed that is because he is so willing to reflect critically on himself. I think that's where I get it from too. Like the book is really doing that. It's me going, what happened? What does it mean? What do I now know about myself? How could I be different? Or how could I approach it differently? And that's what he does. I think he taught me how to do that.
Thank you, Anna. We are up to time. I just wanted to finish with one last question, because so much of what you've spoken about is, and I guess, you know, one of the linchpins of having positive outcomes with mental health is greater understanding of yourself. And also you had the hope that, you know, people reading this book might have a greater understanding of themselves and be able to, you know, take something more meaningful back to their own therapist or apply it to their own journey. But how important is it for the other people, the people who are floating around who don't feel like they have a mental health issue? Because I guess if they read this book, they do know somebody in their life who does have a mental health issue, and understanding that and recognizing it and forgiving it and dealing with it, I guess, better must have a huge impact. So how much of a motivation was that in the writing of
hugely. So something like 1 in 3 Australians have anxiety at any given time, and like nearly 20% have an anxiety disorder in any 12-month period. So you're right, like if someone doesn't recognize themselves in it, they know somebody who would recognize themselves in it. One of the things, there are so many reasons why we're poorly supported in mental health to begin with. You know, the funding is terrible. It's that we don't have enough psychologists or psychiatrists. The waiting lists are so long. The mental health system, the public health system with hospitals is terrible. People, every time I've rung the crisis team, they've said to me, you don't want to go to a public hospital ward. Stay out of there at all costs. So, you know, they know that too. So there are lots of things that we need to do better to support that. We need to have, you know, we need to increase like government payments above the poverty line. That would be a really good start. We saw during COVID when people had job keeper payments rather, they finally had enough money to pay their bills, keep their lights on, put food on the table, and people's mental health, outside of the people who were depressed about COVID, people with chronic mental health were more well than they had been in a really long time. So there's that. But one of the things I talk on a lot in the book is about the language that we have to describe mental illness. And I touched a bit on that before, but one of the biggest barriers, I think, to getting good mental health care is that the clinical language is so different from the language that people within that community use to describe themselves. And when I first went to a doctor when I was 19, when I was psychotic, which is a really scary thing to be, she didn't understand what I meant when I said to her, everything looks like it has glad wrap over it. She was like, I just don't know what you mean. And so I couldn't get the help that I needed for another 10 years. Nobody was able to say to me, this is what's happening to you. Here's one of the ways that we can approach helping you with it. And so it took all that extra, all that wasted life, because the language barrier that we had, we weren't even speaking the same language. Mental health vocabulary is so limited. The clinical language, like depression and anxiety, has no nuance. Someone who is like me, quite debilitated by anxiety, has the same word as somebody who feels nervous when they get up on stage to do public speaking. How can we introduce more nuance to the conversations that we have so that people can get the help that they need, instead of the help that a doctor or a psychologist or a psychiatrist or a triage nurse or whoever thinks that they need, because they think they understand what they mean, but they don't, because there's like 6 words that you can use to describe what you're feeling. So that is, I think, the thing that I want people who don't have their own experience of mental illness to take away from this book. How can I listen better? What have I been missing by not listening carefully? And then how can we use that as a tool to make sure that everybody gets better care?
Thank you. You should show us that pretty cover again. Available at all good bookstores, and of course your local library. And we are here tonight thanks to Latrobe City Library. Anna Spargo Ryan, thank you so much for being so generous with your insights and your stories.
Thank you.
And thank you to everybody who's tuned in tonight. And Vicky, did you have anything you needed to say as the host of this wonderful event?
Yeah, echoing what you said. Lots of people in the chat also saying thank you for being so honest. I think everybody has appreciated your honesty, and I've been listening with a smile on my face the entire time, even though the subject matter has been quite challenging. So bravo to you.
I'm glad. I hope the book's like that too.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks,
Bye.
everybody.